What would you do if the person who condemned you to death was the same one you once saved? If the silver chains burning your skin were placed there by the hands you once held? Tonight I'll tell you the story of Lyra Blackwood, a warrior marked as a traitor, and Kieran Ashworth, the Alpha King who believed love was his greatest weakness. This is a tale of betrayal, redemption, and a bond that not even death could break. A story where the moon goddess herself intervenes to rewrite destiny. If you enjoy stories of forbidden love and supernatural drama, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our tales. The silver burned like liquid fire against my skin, each link of the chain a reminder of how far I had fallen. My wrists were raw and bleeding, the metal searing through flesh with every movement. But I kept my head high as they dragged me through the marble corridors of the Crimson Moon Palace. I was Lyra Blackwood, daughter of the former Beta, and I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The palace itself was a testament to centuries of werewolf power and dominance. Ancient tapestries lined the walls, depicting the great hunts and legendary battles that had shaped our kind. Portraits of past Alpha Kings stared down at me with cold, judgmental eyes, their painted gazes seeming to follow my shameful procession through their sacred halls. The guards flanking me, wolves I had once called brothers, refused to meet my eyes. Their shame was a bitter scent in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of my blood and the oppressive weight of pack magic that saturated every stone of this place. I recognized each of them. Marcus, who had taught me to fight with a sword. David, who had shared his lunch with me when we were children. Samuel, who had once confessed his feelings for me under the old oak tree. Now they were my executioners, duty-bound to deliver me to my fate. "Move, traitor!" growled Marcus, the new Beta. His voice carried the authority of his position, but I could smell his uncertainty beneath the bravado. We had trained together as children, sparred in these very halls. He had been there the night I earned my warrior's mark, had cheered when I bested opponents twice my size. The irony wasn't lost on me that the man who had once celebrated my victories was now leading me to my death. "You know this is wrong." "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the stone corridor. "Deep down, you know I would never betray this pack." His step faltered for just a moment, and I caught the flash of doubt in his amber eyes. But then his jaw hardened, and he pressed forward with renewed determination. "The evidence speaks for itself," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "You were found with Shadowpack communications. You admitted to meeting with Elena Shadowmere in secret. What else are we supposed to think?" "You're supposed to think about who I am," I shot back, anger flaring despite my precarious situation. "You're supposed to remember that I've bled for this pack, fought for this pack, would die for this pack. You're supposed to trust the woman who saved your life at Devil's Canyon." The reminder hit its mark. Marcus's face went pale, and I saw his hand unconsciously move to his side, where a Shadowpack warrior's claws had nearly disemboweled him 2 years ago. I had been the one to drag him to safety, the one who had held pressure on his wounds while the pack medics worked to save his life. "That was different," he said, but his voice was barely audible. "Was it? Or are you just too afraid to question orders that don't make sense?" Before he could respond, the massive doors of the throne room loomed ahead, carved from ancient oak and inlaid with silver runes that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent light. The symbols told the story of our pack's founding, of the first Alpha King who had united the scattered wolf clans under one banner. They spoke of honor, loyalty, and justice, all things that seemed to have died with the previous generation. The throne room doors swung open with a groan that echoed through the chamber like a death knell. The throne room of the Crimson Moon Pack was a testament to power, soaring ceilings painted with the history of our kind, tapestries depicting the great hunts, and at the center of it all, the Throne of Shadows, carved from a single piece of obsidian and inlaid with silver. It was said to have been blessed by the moon goddess herself. The throne had been crafted by the first werewolf artisans, its surface etched with protective runes and symbols of power that had been passed down through generations. Legend claimed that only a true alpha could sit upon it without being consumed by its ancient magic, and upon it sat the man who had once been my salvation and was now my doom. Kieran Ashworth, the Alpha King, even chained and bleeding. I couldn't deny the raw power that emanated from him. At 28, he was in his prime, broad shoulders filling out a black silk shirt that had been tailored to perfection, dark hair that caught the light like raven's wings, and eyes the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes. His presence filled the vast chamber, making it feel smaller, more intimate, despite its grand proportions. But it was more than physical presence. The aura of absolute authority that surrounded him was almost tangible, a weight that pressed down on every wolf in the room. Lesser alphas had been known to submit without question just from being in his presence. Even now, weakened by silver and facing my own death, I felt my wolf respond to his dominance with a mixture of recognition and rebellion. He had been Alpha King for 5 years now, ever since the Great War that had decimated half the packs in North America. The conflict had started as a territorial dispute but had escalated into something far more devastating, a supernatural civil war that had claimed thousands of lives and left entire bloodlines extinct. Under his rule, the Crimson Moon Pack had not only survived but thrived, becoming the most powerful supernatural force on the continent. His military strategies were studied in pack academies, his diplomatic skills had forged alliances that had seemed impossible, and his justice was swift and absolute. And I was about to be executed as a traitor to his crown. The assembled pack members, alphas, betas, and high-ranking wolves from across the territory, watched in silence from the gallery that surrounded the throne room. Their eyes held a mixture of curiosity and bloodlust, anticipation and unease. They had come to see justice served, to witness the fall of someone who had once been among their most celebrated warriors. I recognized many faces in the crowd. Elder Thorne, whose grandson I had mentored in combat training. Lady Catherine, who had commissioned me to investigate threats against her daughter. Commander Hayes, who had personally recommended me for advanced tactical training. All of them now staring at me like I was a stranger, a threat, an enemy to be eliminated. The guards forced me to my knees before the throne, the silver chains pooling around me like liquid moonlight. The cold marble bit into my knees, but I refused to show weakness. I had been trained as a warrior, had earned my place among the pack's elite through blood and determination. I would face my death with the same courage I had shown in life. Lyra Blackwood, announced the court herald, his voice ringing through the chamber with ceremonial gravity. You stand accused of treason against the crown, conspiracy with enemy packs, and the murder of 3 royal guards. How do you answer these charges? The formal words echoed in the vast space, carrying the weight of centuries of pack law and tradition. This was how it had always been done. The accused brought before the throne, the charges read aloud, the opportunity for confession or denial given. But I had no intention of playing by their rules. I lifted my chin, meeting the herald's gaze without flinching. My voice, when I spoke, carried clearly through the chamber, strong and unwavering despite the silver burning through my veins. I answer to no one but the moon goddess herself. A ripple of shock ran through the assembled wolves like a physical wave. Gasps and murmurs filled the air, and I could smell the sudden spike of fear and outrage from the gallery. To refuse acknowledgement of the Alpha King's authority was tantamount to signing my own death warrant, a rejection of the very foundations upon which pack society was built. But I had nothing left to lose. They had already decided my fate before I ever set foot in this room. Kieran had remained silent throughout the proceedings, his storm-gray eyes fixed on some point beyond my shoulder. He looked older than his years, lines of stress and responsibility etched around his eyes like battle scars. The crown, a circlet of silver and obsidian that matched the throne, rested heavily on his brow, and I wondered if he ever removed it, or if the weight of leadership had become so much a part of him that he no longer noticed its burden. His hands gripped the arms of the throne with white-knuckled intensity, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he maintained over his expression. This was the man who had once laughed with me in hidden gardens, who had shared his deepest fears and greatest dreams. Now he sat like a statue, cold and remote as the marble beneath my knees. The accused refuses to acknowledge this court's authority, the herald continued, his voice carrying a note of scandalized disbelief. By pack law, this is an admission of guilt. The sentence is death by silver poisoning to be carried out at dawn. Still, Kieran said nothing. His silence was more damning than any words could have been, a rejection that cut deeper than any blade. The man who had once sworn to protect me was now presiding over my execution. But then I spoke, and everything changed. I remember when you used to have nightmares about this throne, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden hush. You told me once that you never wanted to sit where your father sat, that the crown was a cage made of duty and sacrifice. For the first time since I'd been dragged into the chamber, Kieran's eyes snapped to mine. The storm clouds in his gaze darkened, and I saw something flicker there: recognition, pain, and something else I couldn't quite name. His carefully maintained mask slipped for just an instant, revealing the man beneath the crown. You said the only thing that made the burden bearable was knowing that someone believed in the man beneath the crown, I continued, my voice growing stronger despite the silver burning through my veins. You said that as long as one person saw Kieran instead of the Alpha King, you could find your way back to yourself. The silence in the throne room was deafening. I could hear the rapid heartbeats of the assembled wolves, smell their confusion and growing unease. The very air seemed to vibrate with tension, as if the ancient stones themselves were holding their breath. But my focus was entirely on the man before me, the man who had once been my everything. Slowly, as if moving through water, Kieran rose from his throne. The simple action sent shockwaves through the room like an earthquake. The Alpha King never stood for anyone, not visiting alphas, not foreign dignitaries, not even the Council of Elders. His authority was absolute, his position unquestionable. The throne was not just a seat of power. It was a symbol of dominance that demanded submission from all who entered its presence. Yet here he was, standing for a chained prisoner accused of treason. Impossible, someone whispered from the gallery. The Alpha King stands for no one, another voice breathed. But I knew it wasn't impossible. Because despite the silver chains, despite the accusations and the years of separation, despite everything that had gone wrong between us, the mate bond still hummed beneath my skin like a half-remembered song. Faint, suppressed, but never truly broken. Kieran's lips parted, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the vast chamber with supernatural clarity. Luna. The name hit the assembled wolves like a physical blow. Several actually staggered backward, and I heard more than one sharp intake of breath. Luna. Not my given name, but the pet name he had called me in the darkness of our shared secrets. Luna, because I had been his moon, his guiding light in the darkness of leadership. The name no one else remembered. The name that belonged to a time before betrayal, before war, before everything fell apart. And in that single word, I heard the echo of the boy who had once promised me forever. The throne room erupted into chaos. Your Majesty, Marcus stepped forward, his face pale with shock and something that looked dangerously close to panic. Surely you cannot mean... Silence. Kieran's voice cut through the noise like a blade, carrying the full weight of his alpha authority. The assembled wolves immediately fell quiet, but I could smell their fear and confusion rolling off them in waves. This was unprecedented. This was impossible. This challenged everything they thought they knew about their Alpha King. The power in his voice was absolute, primal, the kind of dominance that reached into the very core of every wolf present and demanded submission. Even I, weakened by silver and facing death, felt my wolf respond with an involuntary shiver of recognition. But Kieran's eyes never left mine as he descended the steps of his throne, each footfall echoing like thunder in the sudden quiet. The crown caught the light as he moved, casting shadows across his face that made him look like the dark prince from children's stories. Beautiful and terrible in equal measure. His movements were fluid, predatory, every inch the apex predator that ruled over all others. The ceremonial robes he wore, black silk embroidered with silver thread and intricate patterns, flowed around him like liquid shadow. But it was his eyes that held me captive, storm gray and intense, filled with emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. "Clear the room," he commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of absolute authority. The command hit the assembled wolves like a physical force. Several of the younger pack members actually whimpered, their wolves responding to the alpha's dominance with instinctive submission. But confusion warred with obedience. This was a public trial, a matter of pack justice. Such proceedings were never conducted in private. "Alpha King," Elder Thorn spoke up, his ancient voice quavering with concern and barely concealed alarm. "The prisoner is dangerous. The charges against her are serious. Pack law demands..." I said, "Clear the room." This time, the Alpha command was so powerful that several of the younger wolves actually whimpered and began backing toward the doors without conscious thought. The force of it pressed against my consciousness like a living thing, and I had to fight not to submit to its pull. "Everyone out, now!" The exodus was swift but reluctant. I could feel their eyes on me as they filed out, could smell their curiosity and fear mingling in the air like a toxic perfume. They knew something momentous was happening, something that would change the very foundations of their understanding. Whispers followed in their wake, speculation, confusion, and more than a little fear. Elder Thorn lingered near the doors, his weathered face creased with worry. "Your Majesty, if she truly is who you think she is, then the implications are mine to deal with," Kieran finished coldly. "Leave us." The old wolf bowed reluctantly and shuffled out, casting one last concerned glance over his shoulder before the doors closed behind him. Marcus was the last to leave, his hand hovering over the hilt of his silver blade with obvious reluctance. His amber eyes darted between Kieran and me, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his mind. He was the beta, responsible for the Alpha King's safety above all else. Leaving his leader alone with an accused traitor went against every instinct he possessed. "Your Majesty, I must protest," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "If she truly is who you think she is, if the mate bond still exists between you, then she could be the greatest threat you've ever faced. A mate's influence over an alpha is absolute. She could—" "Marcus." Kieran's voice was deadly quiet, carrying a warning that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "If you do not leave this room in the next 10 seconds, I will remove you myself. And I promise you, it will not be gentle." The threat was clear and unmistakable. Marcus was strong, one of the most formidable warriors in the pack, but he was no match for an Alpha King in his prime. Especially not one whose emotions were clearly running high. With a final worried glance at me, a look that held years of shared history and genuine concern, Marcus bowed stiffly and retreated. The massive doors closed behind him with a resounding boom that seemed to echo through the chamber like a funeral bell. And then we were alone. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with 5 years of pain and betrayal and loss. The vast throne room, which had seemed so imposing with its crowd of witnesses, now felt intimate, almost claustrophobic. The painted ceilings seemed lower, the walls closer, as if the very architecture was responding to the weight of our shared history. Kieran stood at the base of his throne, close enough that I could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to catch his scent, pine and rain and something uniquely him that made my wolf whine with recognition and longing. Close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar on his jaw from a childhood accident, the way his hands trembled almost imperceptibly at his sides. He looked older than his 28 years, worn down by the weight of leadership and the burden of choices that had shaped not just his life, but the lives of thousands. The crown sat heavy on his brow, and I could see the physical toll it had taken, the way his shoulders carried tension like armor, the careful control he maintained over every expression, every gesture. "Luna," he said again, and this time his voice broke on the name like a prayer or a curse. "That's not my name anymore," I replied, though the words felt like glass in my throat. Each syllable was a struggle, weighted with years of pain and loss. "That girl died 5 years ago. You made sure of that." He flinched as if I'd struck him, and I saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. The careful mask of the Alpha King slipped, revealing raw pain that took my breath away. "You were supposed to be dead," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The report said. The fire at the safe house. The bodies they found? The report said what you wanted them to say," I interrupted, struggling to my feet despite the silver chains making every movement agony. "Just like everything else in your perfect kingdom." "Perfect?" Kieran laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness and self-recrimination. "You think any of this is perfect? You think a single day has passed that I haven't—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching as he fought for control. "Haven't what?" I pressed, taking a step closer despite the pain. "Haven't regretted every decision that led to this moment," he finished quietly. "Haven't wondered if there was another way, a better way. Haven't wished I could go back and change everything." The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was quite ready to cross. I could see the truth in his eyes, could smell the genuine remorse rolling off him in waves, but 5 years of pain and betrayal weren't so easily erased. "You betrayed us, Luna," he continued, his voice growing stronger, more controlled. You betrayed me. You were working with the Shadow Pack, giving them our patrol routes, our weaknesses. I saved you. The words exploded out of me with all the fury and pain I'd been carrying for 5 years. My wolf surged to the surface despite the silver burning through my system, and for a moment, my eyes flashed with inner fire. I saved your life, and you repaid me by branding me a traitor. You were working with the enemy, he snarled back, his own wolf rising to meet mine. You were meeting with Elena Shadowmere in secret, passing information. I gave them nothing. I snarled, taking another step toward him despite the chains. I was trying to prevent a war. I was trying to save lives, your life. By consorting with the enemy? By betraying everything we stood for? By trying to find a peaceful solution? I was close enough now to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Do you remember what you told me the night before the Battle of Crimson Ridge? Do you remember what you said about the cost of war? I saw the memory hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, and for a moment, the Alpha King facade cracked completely, revealing the man beneath, vulnerable, haunted, carrying the weight of decisions that had shaped the supernatural world. Every wolf that dies tomorrow dies because I failed to find another way, he had whispered, against my hair as we lay tangled together in his bed, our bodies still warm from lovemaking, our hearts beating in perfect synchronization. How many lives is my pride worth, Luna? How many families will be destroyed because I couldn't swallow my ego and negotiate? I had held him that night as he trembled with the weight of impending battle, had whispered promises that everything would be all right, that we would find a way through the darkness together. I had believed, with the naive certainty of youth, that love could conquer anything. How wrong I had been. You said you would give anything to avoid the bloodshed, I continued, my voice softer now, but no less intense. So I tried to give you that. I met with Elena Shadowmere in secret, tried to broker a peace treaty. I thought if I could just make her see reason, if I could find common ground. You thought wrong. His voice was cold again, the walls slamming back into place with almost audible force. The Shadow Pack slaughtered 300 of our wolves that night. 300, Luna, including your own father. The reminder hit me like a silver blade to the heart. My father, Beta Thomas Blackwood, had died in that battle. Died believing his daughter was a traitor. Died without knowing the truth, without understanding that everything I had done was to protect the pack he had served so faithfully. You think I don't know that? I whispered, my voice breaking despite my efforts to remain strong. You think I don't carry their deaths with me every single day? You think I don't see their faces in my dreams? Don't hear their voices calling out for justice? Tears I had refused to shed for 5 years finally spilled over, tracking down my cheeks like liquid silver in the moonlight streaming through the throne room's windows. But I was trying to save lives, Kieran. I was trying to save you. I was trying to find a way to end the cycle of violence that had already claimed so many. I believed, that if I could just make Elena see that we weren't so different, that our packs could coexist. You nearly got me killed, he interrupted, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. If it hadn't been for your warning about the ambush... He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening as the pieces finally clicked into place. I saw the exact moment when understanding dawned, when the truth he had been denying for 5 years finally forced its way through his defenses. The anonymous tip, he breathed, his voice filled with wonder and horror in equal measure. The message that warned us about the Shadow Pack's trap at Devil's Canyon. The intelligence that saved my life and the lives of 50 of our best warriors. That was you. I said nothing, but my silence was answer enough. The truth hung between us like a living thing, reshaping everything he thought he knew about that night. About me, about the choices that had torn us apart. You saved my life, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Even after I branded you a traitor. Even after I put a price on your head. Even after I made you an exile in the only home you'd ever known. You still saved my life. I couldn't let you die, I admitted, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of absolute truth. No matter what you thought of me, no matter how much you hated me, no matter what it cost me, I couldn't let you die. Kieran stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant when the full weight of what had happened finally hit him. The color drained from his face, and he staggered backward as if I'd physically struck him. His hand went to his chest, pressing against his heart as if he could somehow contain the pain that was radiating through our bond. Oh, goddess, he whispered, his voice broken and raw. What have I done? What have I done to you? To us? But before I could answer, before I could even process the admission in his words, the throne room doors burst open with enough force to make the ancient hinges groan in protest. Marcus rushed in, his face grim with urgency and barely controlled panic. Behind him came two other guards, their expressions equally grave. "Alpha King, forgive the intrusion," Marcus said, his words coming fast and breathless. "But we have a problem. A big one. The Shadow Pack has been spotted at our borders, a full war party, at least 200 strong. Elena Shadowmere herself leads them, and she's demanding the return of their stolen property." Kieran's head snapped up, his expression hardening back into the mask of the Alpha King with startling speed. The vulnerable man who had been standing before me moments ago disappeared, replaced by the cold, calculating leader who had united half the continent under his rule. "What stolen property?" he demanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. Marcus's eyes flicked to me, and I felt my blood turn to ice in my veins. The look in his amber gaze was one of dawning understanding and barely concealed dread. "The prisoner, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "They claim she belongs to them. They claim Lyra Blackwood is Elena Shadowmere's daughter by blood, stolen from the Shadow Pack as an infant and raised as one of our own." The words hit the throne room like a thunderclap, reverberating off the ancient stones with supernatural force. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet, reality shifting and reshaping itself around this impossible revelation. Daughter? That was impossible. I was Thomas Blackwood's daughter, born and raised in the Crimson Moon Pack. I had his eyes, his stubborn streak, his unwavering loyalty too. But even as I formed the denial, fragments of memory began surfacing like bubbles rising from the depths of a dark lake. The way my father had always been evasive about my early childhood. The lack of baby pictures. The strange dreams I'd had as a child. Dreams of a woman with silver hair singing lullabies in a language I didn't recognize. The way I had always felt different. Other, like I was wearing a skin that didn't quite fit. "That's impossible," I whispered, but even as I spoke the words, I could hear the lack of conviction in my own voice. And from the look in Kieran's eyes, he could hear it too. The revelation hit the throne room like a thunderclap, reverberating through the ancient stones with supernatural force. "Belongs to them?" Kieran's voice was deadly quiet, but I could feel the rage building beneath his controlled exterior like magma beneath the Earth's crust. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and the very air crackled with barely contained power. When an Alpha King's emotions ran high, the very elements responded to his will. The massive chandelier above us began to sway slightly, its crystal pendants chiming with an otherworldly music that spoke of ancient magic and barely leashed fury. Marcus nodded grimly, his face pale with the weight of what he was reporting. "Elena Shadowmere claims that Lyra Blackwood is her daughter by blood, stolen from the Shadow Pack as an infant during the Moonfall Massacre 21 years ago. She demands her immediate return, or she'll consider it an act of war." The Moonfall Massacre. Even the name sent chills down my spine. It had been one of the bloodiest conflicts in recent werewolf history, a surprise attack that had decimated the Shadow Pack's stronghold and left hundreds dead. I had learned about it in history classes, studied the tactical implications, mourned the senseless loss of life. But I had never imagined I might have been there. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet, reality shifting and reshaping itself around this impossible revelation. Daughter, that was impossible. I was Thomas Blackwood's daughter, born and raised in the Crimson Moon Pack. I had his eyes, his stubborn streak, his unwavering loyalty too. But even as I formed the denial, fragments of memory began surfacing like bubbles rising from the depths of a dark lake. The way my father had always been evasive about my early childhood, changing the subject whenever I asked about my mother or my earliest years. The lack of baby pictures, the absence of birth records that other pack children took for granted. The strange dreams I'd had as a child, dreams of a woman with silver hair singing lullabies in a language I didn't recognize. Dreams of running through forests that didn't match any landscape I'd ever seen. Dreams of a voice calling my name in tones of desperate love and loss. The way I had always felt different. Other, like I was wearing a skin that didn't quite fit. The inexplicable moments when pack magic felt foreign to me. When the bonds that connected other wolves felt strained and artificial. "That's impossible," I whispered. But even as I spoke the words, I could hear the lack of conviction in my own voice. Kieran's storm-gray eyes fixed on me with laser intensity, and I could see his mind working, processing this new information with the tactical brilliance that had made him the most feared Alpha King in North America. "Is it?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made my bones ache. "Think, Luna, really think. Have you never wondered why your wolf is stronger than it should be for a beta's daughter? Why you can track scents that others miss? Why silver affects you differently than other wolves?" My mind raced back through years of small inconsistencies I'd dismissed or ignored. The way I'd always been faster, stronger, more intuitive than my peers. The strange resistance I had to certain pack magics, spells that should have affected me barely registered. The way my wolf had always felt different, wilder, more primal than the carefully controlled beasts that other pack wolves carried within them. And the silver. Dear goddess, the silver. I looked down at my chained wrists where the metal had been burning me for hours. By all rights, I should have been dead by now. Silver poisoning was swift and merciless, designed to incapacitate and kill werewolves within minutes of prolonged contact. Yet here I was, weakened but alive, my healing factor still struggling against the poison in my system. "The Shadowpack bloodline carries unique gifts," Marcus continued, his voice heavy with implication and barely concealed dread. "Enhanced senses, resistance to certain supernatural influences, and most notably, the ability to survive silver poisoning far longer than normal wolves. It's what made them such formidable enemies during the wars." The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity, painting a picture I wasn't sure I was ready to see. But the evidence was mounting, each revelation adding weight to a truth that seemed impossible, yet increasingly undeniable. "Elena Shadowmere had a daughter," Kieran said, his voice carefully controlled but carrying undertones of something that might have been awe or horror. "Born 23 years ago during the height of the territorial conflicts. The child was supposedly killed in a raid when she was barely 2 years old. Her body never recovered from the ruins of the Shadowpack's ancestral home." He paused, his eyes never leaving mine, and I could see the wheels turning in his brilliant tactical mind. But what if she wasn't killed? What if she was taken? "Taken by whom?" I demanded, though part of me already knew the answer. The truth was there in the careful way Marcus avoided my eyes, in the tension that radiated from Kieran's frame, in the weight of history that seemed to press down on us all. "By Thomas Blackwood," Marcus replied grimly, his voice barely above a whisper. "On the direct orders of the previous Alpha King, your..." Kieran's father. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could smell the complex mix of emotions rolling off both men. Shock, guilt, anger, and something else I couldn't quite identify. The very air seemed to thicken with the weight of this revelation, as if the throne room itself was struggling to contain the magnitude of what had been revealed. Alpha King Aldrich Ashworth. Kieran's father. A man I had known only through stories and legends, a leader who had been both revered and feared in equal measure. He had died when Kieran was 23, passing the crown to his son in the midst of the Great War that had reshaped the supernatural world. I had always wondered why Thomas Blackwood, a man known for his unwavering honor and loyalty, had never spoken of those early years of conflict. Now I was beginning to understand. "My father knew," Kieran said finally, and his voice was hollow, empty of everything except a bone-deep weariness that made him look decades older than his 28 years. "He knew what Thomas had done, and he let me grow up believing you were packborn." He let me... He stopped abruptly, his jaw clenching as he fought for control over emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "Let you what?" I pressed, taking a step closer despite the chains that bound me. "He let me fall in love with you," Kieran admitted, the words torn from him like a confession ripped from his very soul, knowing that if the truth ever came out, it would destroy everything. Knowing that loving you was not just forbidden, but potentially catastrophic for both our packs. The mate bond, which had been humming quietly beneath my skin like a half-remembered song, suddenly flared to life with painful intensity. I gasped, doubling over as the connection I'd been suppressing for 5 years roared back to full strength. It was like being struck by lightning, every nerve ending in my body suddenly alive with sensation. Kieran staggered as well, one hand flying to his chest as if he'd been shot. The careful control he maintained over his expression cracked, revealing raw need and desperate longing that took my breath away. "The bond," I breathed, my voice barely audible, It's still there. It never left, he replied, his voice rough with emotion and something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. I tried to break it, tried to convince myself you were dead, tried to move on, but it never left. You've been a ghost haunting every decision I've made for 5 years. The admission hung between us like a bridge, fragile and precious and terrifying in its implications. But before we could explore what it meant, before we could even begin to process the magnitude of what we'd learned, Marcus cleared his throat urgently. Alpha King, he interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. Elena Shadowmere is approaching under a flag of truce, but she's brought a war party. 200 wolves, all in battle formation, all carrying silver weapons. If we don't respond soon, I'll meet with her, Kieran decided, straightening to his full height with visible effort. The Alpha King mask slipped back into place, but I could see the turmoil beneath it, could feel his emotional chaos through our renewed bond. Arrange a neutral meeting ground. The old stone circle at the border. The stone circle. I had heard of it but never seen it. An ancient place of power where the first werewolves had supposedly made their pacts with the moon goddess herself. It was said to be neutral ground, a place where even the most bitter enemies could meet without fear of treachery. Your Majesty, that's not advisable, Marcus protested, his beta instincts clearly screaming against the idea of his alpha walking into what could easily be a trap. If this is a trap, if Elena Shadowmere means to... It's not a trap, I said quietly, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Both men turned to look at me, and I felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. How can you be so certain? Marcus demanded, his amber eyes narrowing with suspicion. I met his gaze steadily, drawing on instincts I didn't fully understand, but somehow trusted completely. Because Elena Shadowmere doesn't need tricks to destroy you. If she wanted war, she would have attacked already. The Shadow Pack has always been direct in their approach to conflict. They don't believe in subterfuge when overwhelming force will suffice. I paused, considering the implications of what I was about to say. But more than that, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. If I really am her daughter, then she spent 21 years believing I was dead. She's not here for war. She's here for answers. She's here for the child she lost. Kieran studied my face for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant when he made his decision. The Alpha King in him recognized the tactical soundness of my reasoning. But it was the man beneath the crown who trusted my instincts completely. Marcus, arrange the meeting, he commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. Full diplomatic protocols. Honor guard, but no aggressive positioning. And bring the Pack's genealogy records, all of them, including the sealed archives from my father's reign. Alpha King? Marcus began, clearly preparing to voice further objections. Do it, Kieran cut him off, the command absolute and brooking no argument. And Marcus? Have the silver chains removed from the prisoner. If we're going to meet with Elena Shadowmere, we're going to do it with honor. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue further, but one look at Kieran's expression convinced him otherwise. He bowed stiffly and began working at the locks on my chains, his movements efficient but reluctant. The moment the silver fell away with a series of metallic clinks, I gasped in relief as my healing factor finally kicked into overdrive. The burns on my wrists began to close, the poison slowly working its way out of my system like a retreating tide. But more than the physical relief was the psychological impact. For the first time in hours, I felt like myself again. Better? Kieran asked, his hands gentle as he examined my healing wounds. His touch sent sparks of electricity through my skin, the mate bond singing with renewed strength. Better, I confirmed, then looked up at him, meeting his storm-gray eyes directly. But Kieran, if I really am Elena's daughter, if I'm Shadow Pack royalty, then... Then you outrank me, he finished grimly, his voice heavy with the implications. Elena Shadowmere is the most powerful alpha in North America, possibly the world. If you're her heir, if you're the lost Shadow Pack princess, the implications hung heavy between us like storm clouds. A Shadow Pack princess and a Crimson Moon Alpha King. The political ramifications alone could reshape the entire supernatural landscape, could upset the delicate balance of power that had kept the peace for the past 5 years. But more than that, it meant that everything we thought we knew about ourselves, about our relationship, about the very foundations of our world, was built on lies. There's something else, Marcus said quietly, his voice heavy with reluctance. Something the scouts reported that I haven't mentioned yet. Both Kieran and I turned to look at him, and I could see the dread in his amber eyes. Elena Shadowmere isn't alone, he continued. She's brought someone with her. Someone the scouts recognized but couldn't quite believe they were seeing. Who? Kieran demanded. Marcus swallowed hard, his face pale with the weight of what he was about to reveal. Thomas Blackwood, he said quietly. He's alive, Your Majesty, and he's riding with the Shadow Pack. The world seemed to stop spinning. My father, the man who had raised me, who had died in my arms during the Battle of Crimson Ridge, who I had mourned for 5 years, was alive, and apparently, he had some explaining to do. But before we could process this latest revelation, before we could even begin to understand what it meant, a howl echoed across the territory, long, mournful, and unmistakably powerful. It was answered by dozens of other voices, creating a symphony of sound that made the very stones of the palace vibrate with supernatural resonance. Elena's here, I said unnecessarily. My voice barely above a whisper. Kieran nodded, his expression grim but determined. Are you ready to face her? To learn the truth, whatever it might be? I thought about it for a moment, weighing the magnitude of what we were about to discover. The truth about my parentage, about the lies that had shaped my entire life, about the choices that had torn apart everything I thought I knew about myself and my place in the world. Then I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin with the same defiance I'd shown when I was dragged into this throne room in chains. I've been ready for 23 years, I said, my voice strong and unwavering. I just didn't know it. But as we prepared to leave the throne room, as we prepared to face the woman who might be my mother and the man who had definitely been my father, one thought echoed in my mind with crystal clarity. Some truths are worth dying for. Others are worth living for. The question was, which kind of truth were we about to uncover? The ancient stone circle at the border between Crimson Moon and Shadowpack territories had stood for over 1,000 years, weathering storms and wars and the rise and fall of countless alpha dynasties. Legend said it was built by the first werewolves, blessed by the moon goddess herself as a place where truth could not be hidden and lies could not survive. As we approached the circle, I could feel the weight of its power pressing against my consciousness like a living thing. The stones hummed with ancient magic that seemed to resonate in my very bones, and the very air seemed to shimmer with otherworldly energy that made my wolf pace restlessly beneath my skin. The circle itself was massive, 13 towering monoliths arranged in perfect symmetry, each one carved with runes that seemed to shift and change in the moonlight. The stones were older than recorded history, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, but the power they contained was as fresh and vital as the day they were first raised. Elena Shadowmere stood at the center of the circle, and seeing her was like looking into a mirror that showed me my future. She was tall and regal, with silver hair that caught the moonlight like spun starlight, and eyes the exact shade of violet as my own. Her presence filled the sacred space with an aura of absolute authority that made even the ancient stones seem to lean toward her in acknowledgement. But it was more than physical resemblance that marked her as my potential mother. It was the way she held herself, the unconscious grace of her movements, the aura of absolute authority that surrounded her like a cloak woven from moonbeams and shadow. She was power incarnate, beauty and danger combined in a package that commanded respect and inspired fear in equal measure. She was flanked by her beta, a massive man with scars crisscrossing his face like a roadmap of battles fought and won, and her gamma, a woman whose predatory grace reminded me of a hunting cat stalking through tall grass. Behind them, arranged in perfect formation that spoke of military precision and unwavering discipline, stood 200 Shadowpack warriors. They were silent as death, but their eyes glowed with the inner fire of their wolves, and I could feel the barely leashed violence that radiated from them like heat from a forge. These were not ordinary pack wolves. These were the elite, the chosen, the ones who had survived the crucible of Shadowpack training and emerged as something more than human, more than wolf. But it was the figure standing slightly apart from the main group that made my breath catch in my throat and my heart stutter in my chest. Thomas Blackwood. My father, the man who had raised me, who had taught me to fight and to think and to lead. The man I had watched die in my arms during the Battle of Crimson Ridge, whose funeral I had attended. whose grave I had visited every year on the anniversary of his death. He looked older than I remembered, his dark hair now streaked with silver and his face lined with years of grief and guilt. But it was unmistakably him, the same steady brown eyes, the same strong jaw, the same bearing that had made him one of the most respected betas in pack history. He was alive. After 5 years of mourning, 5 years of carrying the guilt of his death, he was alive, and he was standing with the Shadow Pack. Kieran walked beside me. Every inch the Alpha King, despite the emotional turmoil I could feel radiating through our bond. He'd changed into formal ceremonial robes, black silk embroidered with silver thread in the pattern of his pack's crest, the fabric flowing around him like liquid shadow. The crown sat heavy on his brow, catching the moonlight and throwing it back in sharp, brilliant flashes. His presence commanded respect even from his enemies, and I could see the way the Shadow Pack warriors tensed as he approached, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons before discipline reasserted itself. But I could feel his tension through our bond, could smell the complex mix of emotions rolling off him, protectiveness, uncertainty, and beneath it all, a love so fierce it took my breath away. "Elena Shadowmere," Kieran said formally as we entered the circle, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of diplomatic protocol. "You requested this meeting." "I demanded it," she corrected, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of absolute authority that brooked no contradiction. "And I see you brought my daughter." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain steady. After everything that had happened, after all the revelations and upheavals of the past few hours, I was determined to face this final truth with dignity. "You claim I'm your daughter," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my heart. "Prove it." Elena's lips curved in what might have been a smile, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like pride in her violet eyes. Spoken like a true Shadowmere. "Very well." She reached into her robes and withdrew a small silver pendant, a crescent moon surrounded by stars, hanging from a delicate chain that seemed to capture and hold the moonlight. The moment I saw it, my breath caught in my throat and my heart began to race. I knew that pendant. I'd dreamed about it countless times throughout my childhood, always just out of reach, always calling to me with a voice I couldn't quite hear but somehow understood. In my dreams it had been warm against my skin, a comfort in the darkness, a connection to something I couldn't name but desperately needed. "This belonged to my daughter," Elena said, holding it up so the moonlight caught the intricate engravings that covered its surface. "It was blessed by our pack's moon priestess on the day she was born, imbued with protective magic and bound to her very soul. It carries her true name, her bloodline, and her destiny." She stepped closer, and I could smell her scent now, night-blooming jasmine and rain, with an underlying note of power that made my wolf whine with recognition and longing. It was a scent that spoke to something deep in my genetic memory, something that had been sleeping for 21 years and was now beginning to stir. "But there's a simpler test," she continued, her violet eyes fixed on mine with laser intensity. "The stones of this circle respond to bloodline. They recognize truth from lies, family from strangers, those who belong from those who merely pretend. If you are truly my daughter, they will sing for you." I looked around at the ancient stones, feeling their power pulse against my consciousness like a heartbeat. The runes carved into their surfaces seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, and I could swear I heard whispers in a language older than words. "And if I'm not?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Then you'll know peace," Elena said simply, her voice carrying a weight of absolute certainty. "The stones don't harm the innocent, but they have no mercy for those who would claim a heritage that isn't theirs." Kieran stepped closer to me, his hand finding mine with unerring accuracy. His touch sent sparks of electricity through my skin, the mate bond singing with renewed strength and desperate need. "You don't have to do this, Luna," he said quietly, his voice meant for my ears alone. "We can find another way to verify your parentage." "We can—" "No," I said firmly, cutting him off with gentle but absolute conviction. "I need to know. I've spent my whole life feeling like something was missing, like I was living someone else's story, like I was wearing a skin that didn't quite fit. If this is my chance to learn the truth, to finally understand who I really am—" I stepped forward, toward the center of the circle, where Elena waited with the patience of someone who had been searching for 21 years, and could wait a few moments more. The moment my feet crossed the inner ring of stones, the world exploded into sensation. Power rushed through me like a tidal wave, ancient and primal and utterly overwhelming. It was like being struck by lightning, like being caught in an avalanche of pure energy that threatened to tear me apart at the molecular level. The stones began to glow with soft silver light that seemed to emanate from their very cores, and I could hear them, actually hear them, humming in harmony like a celestial choir. But it was more than sound, more than light, more than any single sensation. Images flashed through my mind with startling clarity, memories that weren't quite memories, fragments of a life I had lived but somehow forgotten, a baby with violet eyes, laughing as silver hair tickled her face, tiny hands reaching for a pendant that caught the light, a woman singing lullabies in the old tongue, her voice filled with love and sorrow and desperate hope, her tears falling like rain on a small face, fire and smoke and the sound of battle, screams in the night and the acrid smell of burning wood, a desperate flight through dark forests with death following close behind, strong arms carrying a small child, a man's voice whispering words of comfort and regret. "I'm sorry, little one. This is the only way to keep you safe. This is the only way to give you a chance at life." Thomas Blackwood, younger and haunted by choices he'd been forced to make, placing a sleeping toddler in a crib and whispering, "Your name is Lyra now. Lyra Blackwood. And I swear on my life, on my honor, on everything I hold sacred, I will protect you. I will love you as my own. I will give you the life your mother wanted for you." The visions came faster now, a lifetime of memories that weren't quite memories, fragments of a truth that had been buried but never destroyed. Elena Shadowmere, standing in the ruins of a nursery, screaming her daughter's name into the smoke-filled night, her voice breaking with grief and rage and desperate denial. Years of searching, of following false leads and cold trails, of hope kindled and extinguished 1,000 times over. A mother's love that never died, never wavered, never gave up hope, even when all logic said her child was gone forever. The pendant, always the pendant, glowing with inner light as Elena held it close to her heart, whispering prayers to the moon goddess for her daughter's safe return. The stone's song reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, and suddenly I understood. The pendant around Elena's neck began to glow with the same silver light as the ancient monoliths, resonating with the same frequency, singing the same ancient song of blood and belonging, and deep in my chest, something answered, a warmth I'd carried my whole life without understanding what it was, a connection that had been dormant but never severed. A bond that transcended time and distance and the lies that had shaped my existence. "Lyra Lee Shadowmere," Elena whispered, and the name hit me like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for 21 years. My daughter, my little moon, my heart that was stolen from me. The stone's light flared one final time, brilliant as a supernova, then settled into a gentle, steady glow that seemed to bless everything within the circle. The ancient magic had rendered its judgment, and the truth was undeniable, written in light and power and the very fabric of reality itself. I was Elena Shadowmere's daughter. I was Shadowpack royalty. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my heritage, about my place in the world, was built on a foundation of necessary lies. The genealogy records confirm it, Marcus said quietly from where he stood at the edge of the circle, his voice heavy with the weight of revelation. He'd been examining the ancient texts while the stones worked their magic, cross-referencing bloodlines and birth records with the methodical precision of a trained scholar. Thomas Blackwood's private journals detail the entire operation. He took the child on the direct orders of Alpha King Aldrich, believing it was the only way to prevent a war between our packs. A war that happened anyway, Elena said bitterly, her voice carrying 21 years of grief and rage and bitter irony. 21 years later, when I finally discovered what had been done, when I learned that my daughter, my heir, my heart, had been living among my enemies all along. Thomas stepped forward then, his face etched with lines of guilt and sorrow that seemed to have aged him decades in the span of years. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion and weighted with the burden of choices that had shaped multiple lives. "Elena," he said quietly, his brown eyes meeting her violet ones across the sacred space. "I know nothing I say can undo what was done. I know no apology can heal the wound that was carved into your heart. But I need you to know, I loved her. I raised her as my own daughter, gave her everything I could, protected her with my life. You stole her from me, Elena replied, her voice deadly quiet, but carrying a fury that made the very air around her shimmer with heat. You took my child, my only child, and let me believe she was dead for 21 years. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it cost me? I do, Thomas said simply. Because it cost me everything too. Every day I looked at her, I saw your eyes staring back at me. Every time she laughed, I heard echoes of the child I'd taken from her mother's arms. Every moment of joy she brought me was tainted with the knowledge of what I'd done. He paused, his gaze shifting to me. And I saw tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. But I also saw her grow into a woman of honor and strength and courage. I saw her become everything her mother could have hoped for and more. And when the time came to choose between my loyalty to my alpha and my love for my daughter, I chose her. I faked my death to protect her, to keep her safe from the political machinations that would have destroyed her. Kieran stepped forward, his face pale but determined, his voice carrying the weight of absolute sincerity. Elena, I know nothing can undo what my father did, what Thomas did, what any of us did. But I need you to know, I love her. I've loved her since we were children, and I'll love her until the day I die. If you want to punish someone for the crimes of the past, punish me. But please don't let our mistakes destroy her future. Elena's gaze shifted between Kieran and me, her violet eyes, so like my own, searching our faces for something I couldn't name. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of authority that seemed to make the very stones lean in to listen. You love him, she said to me. It wasn't a question. I do, I replied without hesitation. Even after everything he's done? Even knowing that his father ordered your kidnapping? That his pack raised you on a foundation of lies? Because of everything he's done, I corrected, my voice growing stronger with each word. Because he's strong enough to admit when he's wrong. Because he's willing to change, to grow, to be better than the men who came before him. Because when it mattered most, when he had to choose between duty and love, he chose love. Elena studied me for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her brilliant tactical mind. She was evaluating not just my words, but my posture, my scent, the way I held myself when I spoke of the man I loved. And you, Alpha King? She said, turning her attention to Kieran. What do you choose now? Knowing what she is, knowing that as my heir she outranks you in every way that matters, knowing that loving her could reshape the entire supernatural world? Kieran met her stare without flinching, his storm gray eyes steady and unwavering. I choose her, he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. I choose Luna. I choose Lyra. I choose love over politics, heart over duty, hope over fear. And if that means giving up my crown, my pack, my everything, then so be it. She's worth more than any throne. Even knowing that your union could upset the balance of power that has kept the peace for 5 years? Especially knowing that, Kieran replied. Because maybe it's time for a new kind of peace. Maybe it's time for unity instead of uneasy truces, for cooperation instead of cold wars, for love to triumph over the hatred that has divided our people for too long. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes moving between Kieran and me, weighing options and possibilities with the calculating precision of a master strategist. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority and the promise of momentous change. The Shadow Pack and the Crimson Moon Pack have been enemies for too long, she said, her words carrying clearly through the sacred space. Too much blood has been spilled, too many lives lost, too many children orphaned by conflicts that should have ended generations ago. But perhaps it's time for a new beginning. She stepped closer to me, her hand reaching out to cup my cheek with surprising gentleness. Her touch was warm, familiar in a way that spoke to genetic memory and bonds that transcended conscious thought. You are my daughter, my heir, my heart that was stolen and has finally found its way home, she said, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the still night air. But you are also your own woman, shaped by your experiences, strengthened by your trials, forged in fires that have made you into something magnificent. The choice of what happens next is yours, and yours alone. I looked around the circle, at Elena, my birth mother, powerful and regal and offering me a heritage I'd never dreamed of. At Thomas, the man who had raised me with love and sacrifice and impossible choices. At Kieran, my mate, my love, my home, standing ready to sacrifice everything for me. At the assembled wolves of both packs, waiting to see what decision would shape their futures and the future of the supernatural world. And I knew what I had to do. I choose both, I said firmly, my voice carrying with the same authority that ran in my bloodline. I choose to be Lyra Shadowmere and Lyra Blackwood. I choose to honor the mother who gave me life and the father who raised me with love. I choose to bridge the gap between our packs, to heal the wounds that have festered for too long, to build something new from the ashes of old hatred. I turned to face Kieran fully, my heart in my throat but my voice steady and sure, and I choose to do it with Kieran at my side if he'll have me, if he'll accept a mate who comes with complications and political ramifications and a mother who could probably destroy his entire pack before breakfast. Kieran's answer was to drop to one knee, right there in the center of the sacred circle, in front of both packs, in front of the most powerful alpha in North America, in front of the ancient stones that had witnessed 1,000 years of werewolf history. Luna, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air, strong and sure and filled with love that took my breath away. Lirelai, whatever name you choose, wherever your path leads, whatever challenges we face, I want to walk beside you. Will you be my mate, my queen, my partner in all things? Will you help me build a world where love matters more than bloodlines, where unity triumphs over division, where our children can grow up knowing peace instead of war? The stones began to hum again, a gentle harmony that seemed to approve of the moment, that blessed our union with the weight of ancient magic and divine approval. And as I looked down at the man who had been my salvation and my destruction, my enemy and my love, I felt the last pieces of my heart click into place. Yes, I whispered. Then louder, my voice ringing with joy and certainty. Yes to all of it. Yes to love, yes to unity, yes to building something beautiful from the ruins of the past. The circle erupted in howls, not of war, but of celebration. Both packs lifted their voices to the moon, creating a symphony of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth and reach all the way to the stars themselves. And as Kieran rose to his feet and pulled me into his arms, as Elena smiled with tears streaming down her face, as Thomas nodded his approval with pride shining in his eyes, as the ancient stones glowed with blessing and approval, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from choosing love over fear, unity over division, hope over despair. The moon goddess had indeed rewritten our destiny, but she had let us choose the ending, and we had chosen love. 6 months later, the wedding was held at the stone circle under the light of the full moon, with representatives from packs across North America and beyond, coming to witness the union that would reshape the supernatural world. The ceremony that would bind not just 2 hearts, but 2 bloodlines, 2 packs, 2 futures into something entirely new. The ancient stones had been decorated with silver ribbons and night-blooming flowers, their surfaces glowing with gentle light that seemed to bless everything within the sacred space. Torches burned at regular intervals around the perimeter, their flames dancing in the evening breeze and casting shifting shadows that made the whole scene feel like something from a fairy tale. Elena walked me down the aisle, her silver hair gleaming in the moonlight, pride radiating from every pore of her being. She wore ceremonial robes of deep purple silk embroidered with silver thread, the traditional garb of Shadowpack royalty, and around her neck hung the pendant that had once been mine, now returned to its rightful place as a symbol of heritage reclaimed. Thomas waited at the halfway point, his own eyes bright with unshed tears as he took my other arm. The 3 of us walked together toward the altar, birth mother, adoptive father, and daughter, united at last in truth and love and forgiveness. Behind us came the wedding party, Marcus as Kieran's best man, his amber eyes bright with joy for his alpha and friend, Elena's beta and gamma flanking us as honor guards, representatives from a dozen different packs serving as witnesses to this historic moment. Kieran waited for me at the altar, resplendent in ceremonial robes that bore both pack crests, the crimson moon and the silver shadow, intertwined in a pattern that spoke of unity rather than conquest. The crown on his head had been modified to include shadow stones from Elena's territory, a symbol of our joined houses and shared future. But it was his eyes that held me captive as I approached, storm gray and filled with love so fierce it took my breath away. with promise and hope, and a future that stretched out before us like an endless horizon. The ceremony was conducted by the Moon Priestess herself, an ancient woman whose power made even Elena seem young, whose voice carried the weight of centuries and the blessing of the divine. As she bound our hands with silver cord blessed by both packs and spoke the old words in the language of our ancestors, I felt the mate bond settle into something deeper, stronger, eternal. By moon and shadow, by blood and choice, by love that conquers all obstacles and transcends all boundaries, the priestess intoned, her voice carrying clearly through the sacred space. I pronounce you mated for life. May your union bring peace to the packs, strength to your bloodline, and hope to all who follow in your footsteps. The kiss that sealed our bond was witnessed by hundreds, but in that moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. When we finally broke apart, both packs erupted in celebration that lasted until dawn, a joyous cacophony of howls and laughter and music that seemed to reach all the way to the stars. Now, as I stood on the balcony of our shared palace, built on the border between territories as a symbol of our united rule, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The Shadow Pack and Crimson Moon Pack had formally allied, creating the most powerful supernatural coalition in North American history. Other packs had followed suit, choosing cooperation over conflict, unity over division. The palace itself was a marvel of architecture and diplomacy, designed to honor both traditions while creating something entirely new. Shadow Pack artisans had worked alongside Crimson Moon craftsmen to create a structure that was both beautiful and functional, a home that belonged to both bloodlines and neither. There had been challenges, of course. Some traditionalists on both sides had opposed the union, viewing it as a betrayal of centuries of enmity and competition. But they were vastly outnumbered by those who were tired of endless war, who saw in our marriage the promise of a better future for their children. Elena had proven to be not just a powerful ally, but a loving mother, teaching me the history and traditions I'd been denied while respecting the woman I'd become. Thomas had been welcomed back into the fold, his sacrifice and love finally recognized and honored. The three of us had formed an unlikely but strong family unit, bound together by love and forgiveness and shared hope for the future. Regrets? Kieran's voice came from behind me, his arms sliding around my waist as he pulled me back against his chest. His warmth enveloped me like a blanket, and I could feel his contentment through our bond, deep, abiding satisfaction with the life we'd built together. Never, I replied without hesitation, leaning into his embrace. You? Only that it took us so long to get here, he murmured against my hair, his breath warm against my skin. But perhaps we needed the journey to appreciate the destination. Perhaps we needed to be broken before we could be made whole. I turned in his arms, studying his face in the moonlight. The lines of stress had eased over the past months, replaced by a contentment I'd never seen in him before. Leadership was still a burden, but it was one we shared now, and that made all the difference. The council meeting went well? I asked, though I could already sense the answer through our bond. Better than expected, he confirmed, his expression growing thoughtful. The Northern Packs have agreed to the new territorial agreements, and the Western Coalition wants to discuss a formal alliance. The European delegation was particularly interested in our model of cooperative governance. He paused, his expression growing more serious. There's something else. Elena received word from the European Packs. They're interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations, possibly even adopting our alliance model for their own territories. That's wonderful news, I said, and I meant it. The idea that our union could inspire peace beyond our own borders was more than I'd ever dared hope for. It is, he agreed. But it also means more responsibility, more travel, more time away from home. We'd be not just rulers of our own territories, but ambassadors for a new way of thinking about pack relations. His hands tightened on my waist, and I could feel his uncertainty through our bond. Are you ready for that? For everything that comes with being not just a queen, but a leader on the world stage? For the possibility that our children will grow up in the spotlight, that every decision we make will be scrutinized and analyzed, and used as a model for others? I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, I'd been a prisoner in chains, branded a traitor, facing execution. Now I was being asked to help reshape not just the supernatural world of North America, but potentially the entire global werewolf community. The magnitude of it should have been terrifying. The responsibility should have been overwhelming. Instead, I felt only excitement and determination. "I'm ready," I said firmly, my voice carrying the same conviction that had sustained me through silver chains and false accusations, and the revelation that my entire life had been built on necessary lies. "We're ready. Together, we can handle anything the world throws at us." Kieran's smile was radiant, transforming his face and making him look years younger. "Together," he agreed, then leaned down to capture my lips in a kiss that tasted of promises and forever, and the bright hope of tomorrow. As we stood there on our balcony, wrapped in each other's arms under the light of the full moon, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The pain, the betrayal, the years of separation, all of it had been necessary to forge us into the people we needed to be, to prepare us for the roles we were meant to play. I had walked into that throne room in silver chains, a prisoner facing death, my identity stripped away and my future uncertain. But I had walked out as a queen, a daughter, a mate, and most importantly, as myself, fully and completely myself for the first time in my life. The moon goddess works in mysterious ways, they say. Sometimes her gifts come wrapped in pain, her blessings disguised as curses, her greatest mercies hidden behind trials that test the very limits of our endurance. But in the end, love always finds a way. Hope always triumphs over despair. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get to help write a new chapter in the story of your people. As Kieran and I stood together under the stars, planning for a future that stretched out before us like an endless horizon of possibility, I knew that our story was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome, enemies to face and allies to win, but we would face them together, as we had faced everything else, with love as our weapon, unity as our shield, and hope as our guiding star. And sometimes, that's all you need to change the world. Thank you for joining us on this epic journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. If you enjoyed this story of Lyra and Kieran, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more supernatural tales, and let us know in the comments what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Will it be vampires, witches, dragons? The choice is yours. Until next time, may the moon light your path, love guide your way, and may you always have the courage to choose hope over fear.